All right, let's jump right in. For the longest time, we thought of anthropologists as clear window into other cultures. Simple, right? But what happens when the people holding that window suddenly realize the glass itself is warped? That's postmodern anthropology in a nutshell. It's this absolutely fascinating moment when the entire field took a step back, looked in the mirror, and started asking some seriously tough questions. And these weren't just, casual questions. They hit at the very core of the discipline. Is it even possible to describe another way of life without your own biases, your own language, and, yeah, your own politics getting in the way? Can an outsider ever really, truly be a neutral observer? This wave of self-doubt led to what we now call the crisis of representation. The whole idea was that the mirror anthropology held up to the world was cracked. Suddenly, anthropologists started to wonder if their incredibly detailed reports, their ethnographies, weren't pure science after all. Maybe, just maybe, they were closer to a kind of fiction, shaped by the author's choices, their writing style, and the power they held. Now, to help us get our heads around this really complex time, our explainer today is based on the fantastic work of the Brazilian anthropologist Luis Nilton Correa. His book is going to be our guide for understanding how anthropology kind of shattered its old way of thinking and then started to piece itself back together. So, how did the field actually respond to this crisis? Well, it wasn't with one single neat answer. It was more like what some call bricolage, which is a French word that basically means tinkering or piecing things together. So think of it like building a mosaic. There's no one postmodern anthropology, but a whole collection of different ideas and approaches. Our job today is to assemble that mosaic, piece by piece. So let's grab our first piece of that mosaic, meta-ethnography. This is the part where anthropology decides to turn the magnifying glass around and look at itself. The really critical thing here is the shift in what's being studied. So instead of just studying a remote culture, meta-ethnographers started studying the studies of that culture. They started asking questions like, who is this anthropologist really? What was their relationship with the people they were writing about? What was going on in the world when this text was written? It literally became an anthropology of anthropology. The book that just blew the doors wide open on this was Writing Culture. When this thing came out in 1986, wow. It was a collection of essays edited by James Clifford and George Marcus, and it did something that was, at the time, totally radical. It took these classic, revered anthropological works off their pedestals and analyzed them just like any other text, exposing all their hidden assumptions, their literary tricks, and the unspoken power dynamics at play. Okay, so if one person's account is always going to be biased and incomplete, what's the solution? Well, let's move to our next piece of the mosaic, which offered an answer. We need a dialogue. So this idea, the anthropological dialogue, argued that a richer truth doesn't come from a single all-knowing expert. Nope. It emerges from a conversation. It's all about putting multiple perspectives, different theories, and clashing observations into a big debate, creating a space where no single point of view gets to have the final say. A key figure here was absolutely Paul Rabinow. In his groundbreaking book about his fieldwork in Morocco, he didn't even try to pretend he was some invisible, objective fly on the wall. Instead, he made his own experiences, his awkward moments, his relationships. All of that became a central part of the story. This practice is called reflexivity, and it's all about admitting that the anthropologist isn't separate from the study. They are an active part of it. All right, let's look at our third piece, which takes these ideas and runs with them. This current even called itself the vanguard, the most forward-thinking group, and it completely embraced that idea of bricolage. So what does that even look like? Well, picture a collage of knowledge. The anthropologist intentionally gives up their role as the only expert in the room. They actively bring in analysis from people within the community they're studying. They pull in ideas from other fields like biology or economics. The end result is this rich tapestry woven from tons of different voices and types of knowledge. A perfect example of this is a book like Designs for an Anthropology of the Contemporary. Seriously, it's not a single author talking at you. It's a recorded debate between four major thinkers, including Paul Rabinow and George Marcus. They're openly arguing, building on each other's ideas, and figuring things out right there on the page. It's the theory of dialogue in action. Our last big piece of the mosaic takes a slightly different path. Instead of focusing so much on the written text and the observer, it turns its gaze inward, to the very wiring of the human mind itself. The intellectual journey of Dan Sperber is just fascinating. So after his fieldwork in Ethiopia, he realized the old ways of interpreting symbols just felt wrong, inadequate. And he started to think, hey, what if the problem isn't just the method? What if it's our whole understanding of the mind? This led him to a pretty wild new idea that our mind isn't one big computer, but has specialized modules of thought for different jobs. And this all led to his famous theory of relevance, which basically says our brains are wired to constantly seek out and process whatever is most relevant in any conversation. Now, the mosaic doesn't stop with those four big pieces. This whole postmodern explosion of critique also gave us some new and really useful words to describe the kind of strange, anonymous spaces we all live in now. One of the most famous of these is Marc Augé's concept of non-places. Just think about it. Airports, highways, chain hotels. They're all spaces of transit, of pure anonymity. They aren't places in the old-school anthropological sense, rich with history and meaning. Augé gave us a name for this huge part of modern life. And the ideas just kept branching out from there. You got experimental ethnography, people playing with new, almost novel-like ways of writing. You had the postmodern vanguard, pushing for a total break from tradition. And then you had this new idea bubbling up, hypermodernism. This theory says we've moved past all the postmodern doubt and into an age just defined by excess. Too much information, too much consumption, too much speed. So, what's the big takeaway here? It's this. Postmodern anthropology didn't give us a new, simple set of answers. Its real, lasting legacy was forcing the discipline to ask better, harder, and way more honest questions. It traded that old illusion of perfect objectivity for a much deeper understanding of how complex power, writing, and just being human really are. And these debates caused real, permanent changes. Now the anthropologist's own role is a key part of any study. That single, all-knowing voice of the researcher, it's been replaced by a whole chorus of voices. And the ethics and politics of doing research are now front and center, where they belong. The result wasn't a weaker field of study, but a much more complex, vibrant, and honest one. Which kind of leaves us with one last big question for you to chew on. When you think about the constant pressure to consume, the insane acceleration of daily life, the endless, mindless scroll on your phone, the feeling of moving through all these anonymous non-places, are we living in the hypermodern world that these thinkers were talking about? Maybe the greatest legacy of postmodern anthropology wasn't just about disassembling the past, but about giving us the essential tools to assemble a new understanding of our own present.